today we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe.
On December 5, 2022, the $60 per barrel price cap and import ban on Russian crude oil came into effect. The G7 and all EU member states have taken a decision that will hit Russia's revenues even harder and reduce its ability to wage war in Ukraine. It will also help us to stabilise global energy prices, benefiting countries across the world who are currently confronted with high oil prices. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission. The sanctions have not reduced the Kremlin's resolve for war 1 year on. CREA analysis reveals that the EU oil import ban and G7 price cap have cut Russia's export earnings from oil by 14%, costing them €34 billion in export revenue. The impact is far short of what could have been achieved. The sanctions impacted Russian oil export revenues heavily in the first half of the year. Losses peaked at €180 million per day in the first quarter of 2023. In January 2023, Russia saw a significant 45% month-on-month decline in overall fossil fuel revenues. Crude oil alone saw a 25% decrease. A failure to enforce and monitor the price cap has allowed Russia to undo the impact in the second half of the year. Revenue losses shrank to €50 million per day in the second and third quarters and recovered to €90 million per day in the last quarter of the year. The effectiveness of the sanctions has fallen due to insufficient monitoring and enforcement of the oil price cap policy. Russia is able to sell its oil at prices above the set cap level and find new, non-sanctioning buyers. Myanmar, Ghana, Brazil, Pakistan, Indonesia and Tunisia are all new or re-engaged buyers. Refining loopholes also legally enables oil products produced from Russian crude oil to enter countries imposing sanctions. Russia has also capitalized on derogations provided to countries in the EU. Since the implementation of the EU's import ban on Russian crude oil, the Neftochimburgas refinery in Bulgaria has imported Russian crude oil worth over €1.1 billion in tax revenues to the Kremlin. The refinery is owned by Russian company Lukoil. Russia also increased use of shadow tankers owned or insured in countries that do not implement the price cap policy to transport its oil. Shadow tankers also reduce the impact of the price cap and raise the price at which they can export their oil, a further blow to the impact of the sanctions. The G7 and the EU retain a stranglehold on Russia's oil exports but have balked at using it. In October 2023, 48% of shipped Russian oil was carried on tankers owned or insured in G7 and EU countries. CREA calls on the European Commission to urgently adopt a 12th sanctions package against Russia that includes strict monitoring and enforcement of sanctions. Transshipment of Russian LNG in EU ports should be prohibited. The importation of oil products produced from Russian crude should be banned. An embargo on LNG and LPG should be implemented. Price cap coalition countries must also improve monitoring and enforcement of the oil price cap and alter sanctions legislation to tie up loopholes. Until further measures are taken, the Kremlin continues to line its war chest from fossil fuel sales and wage a brutal and illegal war on Ukraine. The initial impact of the oil ban and price cap showed that the EU and the G7 have the tools to effectively curtail Russia's oil export earnings. Instead, inexcusable timidity has kept Russia's allies from lowering and strictly enforcing the oil price cap and allowed Russia's earnings to recover. Lauri Mulverta, lead analyst, Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air.